Hey folks, in today's episode, we talk to the founder of WGNinHR, Joe Rencher. She shares her experience in coaching and consulting executives in business, and we talk about what works and what doesn't work in leadership. We try to test our hypothesis against what she's seen. Does love and humanity belong in the workplace? You're going to love what she has to say about it. So enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to Love as a Business Strategy, a podcast that brings humanity to the workplace. We're here to talk about business, but we want to tackle topics that most business leaders shy away from. And we believe that humanity and love should be at the center of every successful business. I'm your host, Jeff Ma. I'm a director at Softway, a technology company that brings and transforms company cultures. And I'm here today joined by my co-hosts, Frank Dana, director at Softway. Hey, Frank.
Hey, Jeff.
And Chris Petrie, Vice President. Hey, Chris.
Hey.
And each episode, we like to dive into one element of business or strategy and test our theory of love against it. And we have a guest today. I'm very excited to have join us. Is Joanne Rencher, who you see on your screen if you're watching, is going by Joe. Joe Rencher, host of the Real Talk podcast and author of Tough as Nails, Finding Your Voice as a Woman in the Workplace. Joanne has had an incredibly diverse career so far. She started at GE and ended up as the Chief People Officer at the Girl Scouts of America. And today, she focuses her efforts on consulting in the HR space and has founded her own business, WGN Consulting. So welcome to the show, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Great to be here. Excited.
Thank you so much for joining us. And if you're familiar with the show at all, we will actually start with an icebreaker. We used to give everyone a unique icebreaker, which put them on the spot quite a bit. We found it easier to just choose one question, and then we'll let you go last, Joe, so you have time to prepare.
Oh,
Frank, what's your number one tip for combating distractions while working from home?
Number one tip for combating distractions. I would say if you're doing any brainstorming where you need to be focused as possible, do not use a computer. So one of the things that I've done is I'll take my notebook downstairs into a room that has no electronics at all and brainstorm with no connection at all to any sort of electronics or technology. And I find that it helps me stay very focused. And then I'm able to bring myself back to the technology when I need to. But that has been proven to be very helpful when I just need a little bit of time to actually focus my energy and my thoughts.
I like it. I'm going to try that, actually. Chris, same question.
My tip is actually going to be to embrace them. So I know for me personally, I will spend more energy trying to ignore something that's very bothersome rather than just spend the time to go and address it and then get it done with. So my sister has a dog that I will sometimes watch, and he can be a distraction. But if you just if he's hungry, if he needs to go out, whatever the case may be, if you just deal with it, then he stops bothering you. But also when you think about like the Pomodoro method, or if you spend 20 minutes on and then give yourself breaks, it actually helps you to focus more. So sometimes those distractions are actually timed for the Pomodoro method, where you actually force yourself to break, so you're not so heavily concentrated that you actually lose energy, lose the mental capacity to continue on. You're not sort of stressed beyond measure. So I would tell people to think about embracing their distractions, and also it lets you lead an authentic life where if you are a parent, you need to acknowledge that you have kids at home, right? Versus try and avoid the reality of you being at home with kids.
Nice. Agreed. Joe, what's your number one tip for combating distractions and working from home?
so there's a distinct disadvantage to going last because people just take your stuff.
You can say that's what you can totally say that I had that in mind the whole
Because
time.
That was it.
Actually, what Chris said really, that honestly really resonated with me, because I tend to step right into the distraction. And I love the flexibility of working from home, from the home office. I love it. I love being able to just kind of, sort of set my own pace. And so if something is happening, like that happened just yesterday, I really needed to give my attention to something. I was able to just sort of like hop off the call, and go tend to that, and then think about what I was doing later on. So I lean right into it.
Mhm.
Obviously, if I'm with a client and it's a major project, I'm not gonna lean into the distraction. But I do think it's important to just kind of go with the flow that you're in and take advantage of the flexibility, because I mean, let's face it, it's harder to do that in a more structured setting. And we've all, this is the greatest work from home experiment ever known to man, and we should take advantage of it. So I like to take advantage of
Yeah,
it.
that's great.
Likewise,
Absolutely.
I know some people are like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. This has been so hard. I'm like, I've been enjoying it. Like,
Totally.
I've just been like me and my sister have been talking about this ad nauseam. We're like, I know we have coworkers that are just like, this is so hard for me, and I get it. But for us, we're like, this has been a joy.
I
Like
know.
nothing but a joy.
Right.
We have just been having fun. It's like I don't have to dress up. Like
I know.
I've saved on dry cleaning, saved on gas. Like we've just been so excited. And when we have that, like be in those meetings where people are complaining about it, we just like sit quietly and I'm like, I don't have anything to add to this. Like I'm good.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chris. I am 100% with you, especially having come from a 2-hour commute into the city.
Oh.
It's nice. It's
That's a
nice.
lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's night and day. All right.
Mhm.
Joe, I gave a very LinkedIn style introduction to you in my opening. There's so much more to you, as I already know. So if you don't mind, can you give kind of yourself that introduction and kind of talk about where your passions lie, really, what you have to share today?
Well, I guess if I were to put a sort of a marker or some sort of label on my career, it would just be all about figuring out how to get other people to that next level. I mean, that's kind of the thing that speaks to me. And I never really understood it that way, because as you noted, I started off in financial services. I worked for some pretty amazing brands, and had a real opportunity to do some amazing work across different sectors and globally and domestically. And I would always kind of come back to how am I spending my time, and how is this helping anything? Like, what difference is any of this making in the life of a person, or the company or the business? And so going from financial services to the nonprofit sector and spending time in some, as I said, major iconic brands, and getting to be the first this or the first that, first chief people officer for the Red Cross, or the first global HR leader to build a public-private partnership for the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. Those things are big jobs, but at the kernel of it, it's how am I helping move this needle forward? Is the business better because I'm here? Are people getting to that next level? Is the model working? So I've always had a passion about kind of pushing towards that question, and so it's kind of full circle now that I'm running my own shop. I get to do that, over and over and over again for different clients across a broad portfolio, but in financial services, data science and technology, and the nonprofit sector, areas that I've gotten to know fairly well. I now get to do that for C-suite leaders and board members and just everyday leaders. How do we get you to the next level? The you might be your business or your team, but it's always the same question. And I love it. I'm a complete geek about what I do. I could talk and talk and talk about it because I always felt when I was on the inside, so to speak, of other businesses, I was always kind of leaving maybe 40% of myself somewhere, 40% of my potential, that I couldn't really push the envelope in certain areas or innovate and really press toward that mark. I couldn't really do it with the level of freedom that I can do it now. So that's what I do. I help people get to the next level.
Nice.
That's awesome.
I was just going to ask a question or just follow up.
Yeah.
So in sort of being, I'm going to say, the wind beneath someone's wings is basically what I'm taking away from what you just said. What is your biggest challenge, or what do you see most often, or a commonality in the leaders that you work with, support, push, talk to, help, in terms of like, because I know that we're all unique, but at the end of the day, we tend to all want the same things. And in leadership, we tend to want to see the same outcomes, you know, whether that be business outcomes or outcomes for our people. But just curious to know, like, what you see and what you come to know in your experiences.
Well, it's a tough question for me to answer, and I think the reason is because my answer is that, yeah, there are common threads that, you know, leaders have and businesses have, and, you know, whether it's more revenue, or, you know, you're expanding, or it's a it's a business transformation, or it's a new program, or whatever it is, there's certain common threads in business. But I find, and which is what's exciting to me, that every leader is so different that those uniquenesses are either, you know, things that you can latch onto and sort of help propel them to that next level, or things that you can sort of like smack your head and say, wow, this is how you've been doing stuff. This, how could you possibly have been this successful? You know, and then you have everything in between, because people, you know, we're all so different. And so you put the unique individual in the context of you know, any business, any company, any organization, and you get all these different variations of success, or not so, you know, not success. And that's where I enter the picture, you know, the opportunity to problem solve, which I love, and to do it with the uniquenesses of the person, and, you know, what makes people tick. I mean, I'm a true, I know it sounds corny, but I'm a true people person. So I like study people and really observe and try to understand them. And so the differences in leaders is just fascinating to me. So that's the heart of why I love what I do, because no two problems are the same. I may bring the same toolkit. You don't have to reinvent wheels. I may bring the same toolkit, but no two problems are the same, because people are so unbelievably different.
Yeah. Nice. I stand corrected. There are a lot of differences between people and leaders.
Let it be known on this day.
Yes. What is today?
I wanted to
the 19th of
the 19th, August 19th.
As
we
the time
have,
of
I took
recording,
note.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how can you get, where do you start getting people to that next level? If you're seeing an opportunity in that individual, I know that you mentioned that you'll bring the same toolkit for a different variety of problems, right? But how do you typically start with getting them to that next step?
So in my business, what just popped into mind, and I never really thought about it this way, but I think it applies nicely. At my firm, WGNinHR, we talk a lot about 5 principles, not in any particular order. I'm going to just name them: speed, precision, impact, growth, and service. And so at any given time, those principles are in operation in helping people to think about, well, what is that next level? And, you know, so speed, for example, you know, consultants get oftentimes a pretty bad rap, but also a true rap, you know, which is, it take a long time to sort of come back to an answer that I could have found myself. And your methodology is a little cumbersome, and the PowerPoint decks are a little long. And, you know, you got a lot of people on that team. You know, do we really need that? Are we paying for all of that? You know, so you have certain MOs in this world where I think speed is really pivotal to actually helping people. You know, because sometimes you have a window of opportunity when I like to start with the end in mind. And when I work with a client or I have a conversation, I'm starting like, what's the end goal? Let's work our way backward. And, you know, when I think about that, I don't want to go at a sort of a glacial pace to do that. I want to help them build on the momentum when they get excited about something. So speed matters, but precision matters. I don't want to just go fast just to go fast. I want to be precise. I want to understand. I want to listen really well. And then I want to understand, okay, let me zoom in here, because it looks like looks like this is where some of the issues are, and I want to peel that onion away until there's nothing else to peel, and be really precise about what it is we're doing and how you're spending your time and your money, to help me, or to work with me to help you on your solutions. And then that whole, that growth, to me, that's the differentiator. When somebody or a business wants to get to that next level, growth means very different things to different people, to different industries, to different businesses. I was talking to, with a client yesterday, and, they're struggling with, what does growth mean? It's a nonprofit client. And so what, they have to be able to prove to donors that they can actually not grow responsibly and not just sort of, raise, and increase operating expenses without having something to show for it. So what is growth in that particular world? And then impact, that speaks for itself. If we can't show something measurable when all is said and done, you could talk about the wind beneath your wings, all you want, but what difference did it make? If you can't answer that question in tangible terms, then it doesn't really matter. And then the service thing is really personal for me, because I always feel like I'm in service to someone and to people and to businesses. I like to think in terms of serving, because it gets me out of the way, it keeps me tamed and humble, because I'm it's not about me, it's in service. I mean, I don't always I have to sometimes be reminded, but I do really work hard to think about service. I'm serving you. So if I'm serving you, or if I'm serving that business, getting to the next level is all of where my energy comes from. It's all where my creativity comes from. And that's that should be gold at the end.
Help me connect with the role that I'll call it love, but you can call it culture, or any of those tools. Where does that exist in your world? Like, what kind of role does that play?
Well, I could give a little bit of a story,
Please,
and make it, somewhat, when people say long story short, and then they go on for like forever, and it's like, it's too late to say that. It's too late.
I want the long version.
We like long stories.
Oh, okay. All right. So
set the stage.
All right. I was a chronic introvert. I mean, to the point where, I always liked school. I know that sounds a little nerdy, but I did like school, and I did, I liked, the different subjects, not all of them, but I really enjoyed the kind of like bookwormy parts of stuff of school, but I wasn't expressive about anything. And so, in parent teachers conferences, is that what they call it? The parent teacher night and whatever, my parents would go and they'd say, yeah, she's good. She's really good, but she doesn't talk. She doesn't say anything. So I was very, very introverted and very uncomfortable with not only my figurative voice, but my literal voice, because I used to be teased mercilessly by these really mean kids that would convince me that I sounded like a man and my voice was so deep. And, it was kind of rough growing up. And so I was very insular and closed in how I thought about things. And so while I felt like I always had a really big heart and compassion for people, and, I was that person that, if someone was crying, it's like, I'm crying too. Why am I crying? Someone's tears actually cause me to cry. I was always that person. It was always hard to express it because of this kind of introverted nature and closed way of being. And so when I got, as I started to get older and sort of find myself, I guess, and really get comfortable, talking, it was sort of like, wow, I really like talking. And I really like what I have to say. And I think other people like what I have to say. And I got more comfortable with myself and what I sounded like. And it caused me to think, and to get back to your question, Jeff, it caused me to think that I could actually use my voice to make a difference, not just in the work, the work world and all the, business sense, but to actually show love and compassion. I could actually show that part of myself. I put my toe in the water periodically. If someone walked in, when you're in HR, people come into your office and they tell you, some pretty, messed up stuff at times. And, it can get very complicated just by nature of, by virtue of what we do or what happens in the field. And so I would put my toe in the water and really just connect with people on a very personal level. Once I found my own voice, I discovered, wow, I think I'm supposed to be using this in ways that are well beyond just business. I'm supposed to be encouraging other people and helping other people. Maybe sometimes crying with other people, that matters in the workplace just as much as the business matters. So I think love has a total place in the workplace. It has a spot there that we don't use, that we take for granted, or that we think is mushy or dumb. But I think that's what makes us human. And so why should we hide that when we enter the workplace? If people bring all of themselves to work and their baggage and all their issues, you're not just dealing with a performance problem, you're dealing with that whole person. And so I learned how to, not only once I found my own voice, but to use it to sort of tease out the voices from other people. Like, what are you really thinking? What's behind this? Well, why were you so upset about that? Help me understand. And I think that makes a difference. I think leaders are often uncomfortable with that. I don't show up to client meetings talking about that on day one, but I do like to operate that way, because once I found my own way of expressing myself, I am kind of like on this quest to make sure other people can do the same thing.
Awesome. So saying that you don't show up on the first day talking about that, how does it show up? Like, when do you find the opportunity to bring up this part of the conversation with leaders who may not see the importance or the connection between maybe their behaviors or their own psychological safety with their teams and the outcomes that they're trying to seek or drive in the business?
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes those moments are very spontaneous, but I think even spontaneous moments need preparation. And I remember once I was in a CEO's office, and we were having the conversation about a major change that was going on for them that was going to result in them having to transition. And, the transition was not in their control. And so there was just a lot that, you can imagine, after several years with the business, and, you were at the helm, and all of a sudden now you've got to step back from all of that involuntarily, and you've got to figure out how to, like, what do I do now? What's next for me? Your ego takes a massive hit. And I remember saying to that person, I'll never forget this moment where I looked at them, and I'm really trying to be neutral in how I describe it, because heaven forbid, this pops up somewhere and it's like, I didn't mean for you to tell that story. And I remember looking at them as we were because I had been working with them, on sort of transitioning and the plan and handing off, and the team, that was going to continue afterwards. I mean, it was a very complex kind of a transition. You couldn't just pluck them out and then, sort of go on about your business. It was complicated. And I looked at them and I said, how do you feel? So how are you I think I said, how are you feeling? And that one question, I mean, this was a person that was pretty tough, and, had been riding this for, this change for, a period of time, not showing a lot of emotion, pretty matter of fact. And that one question, sort of like, it was like a little thread that you pull, and it unraveled everything. And, they fought those tears, they fought. And then finally it was just sort of like, let's put it all out. Let's just talk about that. We don't have to have answers and solutions. There are no models for this. There's no Gantt chart. Let's just talk about how you actually feel. And that was powerful. And that was really, really powerful. I learned a lot about that moment. I didn't plan on asking that question. It was it was really a spontaneous moment. But I said to myself afterwards, I have to ask that question more. and
Yeah.
be prepared to actually dive in on that personal side. And I was able to kind of show compassion and show humanity that this wasn't just a business transaction, but
Yeah.
it was good.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really that's something that I've ever since I was in business school was, again, you don't talk about your personal feelings when you're learning about accountancy or
Right.
marketing or HR or any of the things that would be in a function of a business. And what's really odd is that you don't talk about how other people feel about stuff and
I
how to
know.
navigate change. Like
Right.
none of like they talk about organizational development, they talk about like the theories and the concepts, but like there's no preparation on how do you have a conversation about a major change, or
Right.
how do you like humanely lay someone off. Like none of those actual sort of soft critical skills, as I would call them, but soft
Hmm.
skills to others, are actually given in business school. And so the entire time I'm sitting there in class, like, how do you have this conversation? I
Right.
mean, like, of course, strategically, this all makes sense. Like, it
Mhm.
makes sense why you would, lay off this to employ automated robot. Like, all of that makes sense. And so
But
it's
how do
interesting.
you
Yeah,
do
but
it?
how do you do
Yeah.
it? And it's interesting that even to this day, you are still in that situation where you have to help leaders navigate those waters who have years of experience, have done some of the smartest things in anybody's career that you could imagine, but still struggle with that ability to process their own feelings, let
Hmm.
alone understand how do they make how other people might feel about change inside of their strategy, plan, or communication.
Hmm. Because we kind of compartmentalize things when we go into to to work, so to speak. It's sort of like we put ourselves in this box, and it's sort of like you stay over there. No crying here and blood sport. You know, you stay in that box, and we deal with other stuff in this other arena, and you start to take that um, that other part out of the box. Who knows what can happen? And can you imagine? I mean,
Yeah.
what would workplaces actually look like if we did that more? I think it would be
Yeah.
really uh, it would
Yeah.
be interesting and better, I think.
Yes. It'll be scary at first because you feel like we're taking too much into consideration. We're going to be paralyzed if we were worried
Right.
about how everybody's going to feel about
I
this,
know. Well, this is
and
true. I mean, balance. There is a balance
yeah.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah. But what
Hmm.
I've learned is that by just taking the step to even think that way,
Hmm.
you can get 80% of it right,
Yeah.
in terms of anticipating feelings or reactions to things.
Hmm.
And, one of the things that we've done recently internally is we were given a list of questions that you can ask before you sort of communicate or make a decision or build a product or a service or launch an initiative that
Hmm.
makes you stop and just think, oh, what happens if a bad actor gets a hold of this? How could they make this worse? How could they like all of those types of questions that prepare you for how to anticipate, the worst or the feelings or the mushy side of things,
Hmm.
even though that's not the core of the decision that needs to be made, even though
Yeah.
it's not going to stop the decision from being made. It at least allows you to think about, okay, how do we position this? How do we say this?
Hmm.
How do we answer this? How do we prep people? Who
Hmm.
needs to learn about this first, second, third, fourth, right? You start to figure out solutions around it versus assuming everybody's compartmentalized,
Hmm.
because that's not true.
Right. I think that's such a great point. Yeah. Yeah. I actually talk about, I think about, I'm big on talking points and,
Mhm.
sort of like prep and FAQs. But the way you just described it, though, it is much less clinical sounding than the way I
Yeah.
might do that. The way I might talk about it, it's more sort of like, let's unpack some of this stuff in advance.
Mm.
Hmm. That's good.
Yeah. And
I wanted,
it's actually from a technology company that asks these questions when they're building a
Mm.
product, but it can be taken into all sorts
Yeah.
of different decisions. I'll share the list with you so you have it, but it's just like
Okay.
a really interesting list of questions that are
That's cool.
that force you to think differently,
Yeah.
even if you are decided, if that makes sense.
Mm. I like that, Chris.
and at first when I saw the list, my first initial reaction was, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. Like, how are we going to be able to communicate anything?
Right.
And then you start to recognize the value of making sure that you are prepared
Hmm.
and considering every angle, every facet, as much as you can. You're always you're not going to hit everything, but
Right.
um That was my first reaction. It was like, this is going to be so challenging and so difficult. But in reality, you need to take the steps to create the environment for people to communicate appropriately and effectively. And it's much more important than creating something that would harm someone or, cause problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think one of the, of those questions, the most powerful one to me is, who or what disappears if your message or decision or product is successful? Because then you start to like, oh, who is going to be impacted the most, or what goes away? Like what is lost in this?
Yeah.
Because again, if you've already made that decision, it's just about acknowledging it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you can start to really think about, what you do as far as fallout, right? If there is going to be fallout.
Mm-hmm. Kudos to you guys. I mean, oftentimes in the technology space, you get a bad rap, that you're seen as perhaps more robotic, and that's you just blew that, myth right out of the water. Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of technologists do not ask these questions, so
that's true.
There is a reason why that rap exists, but no, it's something that does come up, and unfortunately, you have to learn it the hard way enough times in order to understand how to sort of be prepared for the future. But it sounds like you're helping your leaders now, after that one experience, really start asking themselves how they're feeling, so that way they can see how it might impact others too, right?
Yeah, it gives people permission to be a little bit more vulnerable.
Yes.
And Joe, I wanted to ask you about your book, Tough as Nails, and I wanted to know a little bit about what was the impetus, what compelled you to title that, and really pushed you to write this book.
Well, I was in this place of having thought for a long time that I wanted to write a book, and I wanted to, again, figuring out how to help people get to that next level. I often tease and say that I'm, I carry this title of the Chief Encouragement Officer, because I'm always looking for ways to encourage people. Like, how can I encourage you? Or I'll sign off sometimes and say, be encouraged, and it's a constant for me. And I always thought and said I was going to write a book. And I was in a place career-wise where I hadn't yet taken the business that I'm in now kind of to the mainstream. It was still a side hustle a little bit, growing side hustle that I was having a huge amount of trouble managing along with my day job. And I thought, I really want to write in this place of thinking about what's next for myself. I want to write something that can help other people. And I want to be able to put myself in the book in ways that help people with the experiences that I know other people have struggled with. And so in the book, there's some sort of biographical information there in terms of, what I shared about being a chronic introvert and, struggling to have found my voice. But I don't just make it all about that. I make it about, well, how do you turn the corner? How do you become a better listener? How do you test your environment and take the temperature of a room? How do you stay authentic when everyone around you feels so inauthentic? How do you take a unique position about something and disagree without being disagreeable? There are so many things that I thought about and at times struggled with, at times coached other people on, that were all so real that I wanted to put it all in the book for other people to really glean from. And so all of those chapters are heavily researched, have some at times autobiographical information. At times they're pulled from real life information with names and dates omitted to protect the innocent, kind of a thing. And they're very much action oriented. So it's not just, I think you should do this. It's very actionable. They're all very actionable strategies and takeaways. And that's what made me happy about the book, being able to say, what, I can help you. And when Kirkus Reviews described it, I mean, first of all, it was my first book review from a major reviewing body. And, for it to be positive was I mean, I had a stomach ache for like days leading up to when the review came out, and for that to be so positive. But then they put this capsule around it, and they say they said it was a well thought out career manual, and I thought, yes, that's exactly what it is. I never thought of it as a career manual, but that's exactly what it is. That's why I wrote the book. I wanted it to be a career manual, and they actually put words around where my heart was. So that's why I wrote it.
Nice. So what's
Very
been
cool.
some of the responses you've gotten, and have you gotten testaments from people who've read it and felt like their
Yeah.
careers have changed because of it?
hmm
Would love to
Yeah,
hear some of those stories.
lots of them. Those are so. I mean, I can't even describe sort of what those feel like. I get them through InMail on LinkedIn often.
Mhm.
At times, people literally take the time to sort of old school, write to me.
Nice.
I get it through maybe emails, or if I'm doing a post on LinkedIn, someone will sort of slip in a comment around it, and so I get it in different ways, and it's just precious. It's precious to me, and it speaks to it. Generally, if I were to wrap up the themes that I hear, it's this is so helpful. I was going through X, and I got your book, and it was so helpful to be able to sort of apply strategies. Or I could really relate to that chapter on the mean girl culture because, oh my gosh, I'm working with someone right now where, I'm going through the exact same thing. Or, I really struggle with representing myself, you know, financially and negotiating for more money. And, those tips were really useful, that kind of a thing. So people do get specific with me, which I love.
Nice.
And yeah, that's exactly why I wrote it.
Nice. And I want to broach a topic, and I'm going to try and say it where I'm not trying to be offensive, but it is geared towards women. And so I'm always curious to find out, like, being a woman in the workplace, what are some of those big impediments, blocks, challenges that you would love for our listeners to understand or at least hear about? Because I think sometimes it's very hard when you are not a part of the community
Mm-hmm.
to see it, feel it, experience it, and then know how to not promote it or to
Mm-hmm.
avoid it or not be it, so to speak, if you are the impediment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that are unique to being a woman in
A
the work.
woman in the workplace, yes.
Yeah. I would say, it makes me think of, I think it was a couple of months or so ago, I was on a webinar or something like that. And I think the topic was the number of women that have left the workplace because of the pandemic,
Mhm.
that had, decided to homeschool and, just really stepped back and made personal decisions that have impacted their careers. And, you know, lo and behold, the entire uh, industry, writ large that they may have been a part of when it was so, there was such a dearth of female representation to begin with, and
Mhm.
that exodus has really taken a toll. And I remember thinking to myself as I was listening to people talk that people tend to think of women as blocks of,
Mhm.
so that that there's this kind of one um, perspective that we all share,
Mhm.
and and therefore there should be one solution that can be applied, and that's just so wrong.
Mhm.
And so I think the big takeaway for me is, you know as a woman in the workplace, I can have divergent opinions about things, and I don't have to feel as though I'm betraying my female, my sisters, or that,
Mhm.
that there's some, code that I've broken. I think that allowing, you know, women in the workplace to be as different and as unique as we all are as people is the best thing that you can do to support us, and to not make assumptions about anything, that's attached to why we work, why we choose, to work at home, why we, you know, decide that, flexibility is more important in some cases, and money, just straight up salary is more important in other cases. It doesn't have to attach itself to, who we are. And I think that's an important concept, not only for employers to get, but also for women to get, to allow ourselves to actually just think a little bit more outside the box, and have opinions that may be a little bit unpopular, and feel okay about that. I think when we get to that stage, that diversity of thought and diversity of perspective can go a long way in just female representation in the workplace.
That's really insightful. No, I would say that I agree, but I'm not a woman, but I hear you, and that sound like it resonates with me what you're saying. And I'm also speaking from just being a minority myself, where it's like I might have unpopular opinions that are unpopular in the Black community. Doesn't mean I'm not Black.
Exactly.
But I just like,
yeah, I have a chapter actually in my book about that. It's called Age and Race and Age Factors, and I talk about the sort of I can. We don't all think the same way.
Yeah.
Don't make assumptions.
Yes. No, for sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit of different topic, but about, I'm always really interested because I know you work really tactfully with executives, leaders, and that and such, and they're looking for a lot of tactical, very grounded and academically backed kind of methodologies and understandings. I'm curious your opinion, or at least your experience of how these people would react to the word love in the workplace. Because I don't get to meet all of them. We worked with a lot of them. We worked with a wide range, but I just love asking, because you work with these folks on the regular. How would you say on average, or just in your experience, they would react to the word love?
I think they would cringe. I think they would recoil, and I think they'd be interested still. I think all three. I think they'd be interested.
Perfect.
And they'd be interested because I don't believe I come across as, goofy-ish and, sort of like, let's talk about love. I don't believe I come across that way. And so, because I tend to sort of be very bottom line-ish in terms, what are we meeting about? What's the agenda? Let's work backwards here and actually, get stuff done. I'm a get stuff done type of person. If I'm putting on that other hat and now talking about love, they're like, that's different. I think it piques their curiosity, and they want to know a little bit more, because I do have that side to me. But I do think that, for the most part, their natural bent wouldn't be that.
Why do you think that is? I guess just an experience, like when these types of spaces get approached, what is the detractor?
I mean, because I think we've, it's interesting. I think it's generationally different, because, I'm a Gen Xer, and, I work, I would say quite a bit with maybe late Xers and boomers, so they're, tend to be maybe a little bit older than me or my age. And then there's a generational difference, I think, between those categories and young Xers and Gen, what is it? What are we on? Y or Z? I lost track. It's Z.
Gen Z is the sort of the up and coming and next in the workforce generation. And then
and the Y,
Gen Y and millennials are interchanged.
Oh, okay, there you go. I feel like those sort of younger generations are a little sort of, they're more complicated, and they sort of wrap everything up in that conversation, sort of how they feel and what they thought, and oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was going to happen. So they are naturally more in, sort of in sync with those kinds of conversations, because that's just how they tend to be wired. This is a generalization. I don't make it shouldn't be a sweeping, it doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
we'll have
Sure.
exceptions to all of this, but they tend to just sort of be wired that way. And they come into the workplace thinking that, this is how, this is how I can just be, and, when you get to the older generations, I think we were honestly taught to just be a little bit more guarded, circumspect, and just, not as trusting, and not as direct around a lot of things, because, hey, you never know who you're dealing with there on the other side of that table. Everything is a constant negotiation, and, assessing. And so it's a little bit different, I think, generationally. And so I think you'll see those differences when you start to broach those topics. But that said, I really do think it comes down to the person. I really do. I have one client in mind that who makes me smile, and I just love working with him. He's a CEO of a legacy organization where he's just so enjoyable, and so authentic. I could totally see him, jumping into the conversation around love in the workplace and being so intrigued about it. Whereas I have other clients where I would never, so I would really think long and hard before I actually, and how I brought something like that up, just because of the way they carry themselves, the way they think about life in general. So it really does depend on the person, and the person that I enjoy, that I'm talking about, that I think would just be all over it, is I forget what's before a boomer, a traditionalist, I think. I mean, he's up there, he's up there, and he's very much soft at heart and wonderful as an individual.
Yeah, I ask because, I think we sit in a very interesting moment in history that's accelerated, in my opinion, through the pandemic. Is that it's like a workplace revolution, I think, is coming. You mentioned it yourself. There's this divide in just how the younger, workforce operates, what they expect, what they need to be happy, what they desire in satisfaction, is different, wired differently, completely different mindset and culture. And we're sitting in that environment right now where the old guard is still in charge, but it is transitioning, right? It is changing over. And now more than ever, culture and a lot of these topics, especially as you start talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, but culture in general, and all these topics that, that normally were not necessarily discussed as much, vulnerability in the workplace, and bring your whole self to work. These are all products of the clash of these two worlds.
Yes.
And the reality is, I mean, the revolution is bound to come, in my opinion, because the young folks will eventually take over. But I see that. It's just, I've seen so many environments where these young folks come with their dreams, they come with their ambitions, they come with their desires and what they need, but they have to conform, right, to leadership that is operating in a way that's completely different from what they want to be, and it kind of slows down this revolutionary process, right? Because these kids or these younger folks adopt that as the way to move up. They learn from that, they perpetuate it, and they kind of propagate it forward into their leadership style. And I do believe that the world is changing around those kinds of things, and that but I still think that's the norm, for now. I still think how companies are structured, how people are kind of laid out in organizations, and how performance is measured nowadays, it's all still in that same legacy system. And so a big part of Love as a Business Strategy and what we believe in is bringing humanity back to the workplace. And it's not really a shot at the generational gap. It's not a shot at older folks versus younger folks or anything like that. But we've seen, like, statistically from metrics that, this message is very well embraced by the younger workforce, by the up and coming workforce. And they're looking for their leaders to meet them somewhere, right? Looking for them to pick up, even if just a little bit of it, but to have these conversations, to come to the table, and not just be, you know, a boss,
Mhm.
and something more that can help them get there. And so that's why I had to ask. I'm always very curious, because you get this opportunity to kind of work, for bird's eye view with these environments.
Mhm.
Does that
Yeah.
resonate with you? Does that, like, do you see that happening in your space and the challenges that these leaders deal with?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many thoughts that I have, Jeff. When you have, I mean, there's so much what you to unpack of what you just said, because we are in this time, this kind of revolutionary time, and there are a lot of people that have such, just strong opinions about a lot of things, and it's incredibly polarizing, and it's going to be the leaders that actually rise, the in my view, the leaders that actually rise to this occasion, this like unprecedented moment in time in this workplace setting, where we're talking about things that we would have never talked about just 3 years ago, and all of a sudden we're sort of, everything is now part of a conversation that is very uncomfortable for some people, that you know you don't really want to slice and dice, and you thought you could just kind of come to work and you know leave all the other stuff outside of the workplace. And there's some arguments for maybe that being the way it should be in some cases, and there are arguments for it not. But the leader that rises to the occasion, that can sort of deal with all of the issues, um, and run the business and get stuff done and actually move your team forward and have people motivated and happy and staying, I think is the leader that is the authentic. I bring all of me to work, even when I don't know what I'm doing, even when I don't know what I'm talking about, even when I thought I had the answer and I really messed up, and I can say that. I can actually be honest about that, or I can say, you know what, I'm having a really bad day. Um, that doesn't mean I'm a loser or a leader that you shouldn't follow, but it just means that I'm a human being that you know struggles with a lot of the same things that you're struggling with. I think the leader that can figure out that sweet spot is actually going to rise to this occasion. And we might be really shocked at what that leader, when I say what the leader looks like, I mean in terms of age, I mean in terms of background. We might be really shocked at the next sort of generation and wave of leadership. And so while we're hanging on to our kind of old school models, and how we always did stuff, and you know while we're hanging on to that, there's a whole new crop that's coming up that's really thinking about things very differently. And I think we're going to have to make space for that, because honestly, we're going to learn a lot from them, and they from us. It's a two-way street. But I think the workplace setting is going to be just a lot different, because the world is a lot different. So if the world is a lot different, how could the workplace stay the same? That doesn't really make sense,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I have a lot of different viewpoints that this podcast could go on, for a long time about that, but I'll just leave it there. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is probably a whole other podcast that we can just dive
Totally.
into that. But I wanted to save time today to talk a little bit, before we close,
Okay.
just a little bit more about WGN and HR, like what you do, and make sure
Mhm.
the audience knows, how they can reach you or find your book. If you can just take a moment and tell us about that real quick.
Okay. So the way to think about WGN and HR, which feels like a mouthful, is that it started off by with me calling it "Who's Got Next in HR," and the reason I called it that was because I was on a stage doing a keynote speech, and I was talking to a bunch of senior HR professionals about, well, what's next for you? Who's got next in this audience? You're always sort of worrying about someone else getting taken care of, developed, hired, etc. Who's got next here? And I said that to them. And from that moment, an idea was born around what we need in the field of HR to get to that next level and to help other people get to that next level. It started out differently. It's now morphed into these 3 practice areas of, the executive search, finding talent at the C-suite level, HR solutions or strategic solutions, major transformations, and coaching, which is a smaller part of the business. But WGN in HR is just that. And so WGNinHR consulting.com is how you can reach me, and how you can get on the website and learn so much more. Sign up for a free consultation or just good conversation. You never know where it can go. And my contact information is there. But I'm also on LinkedIn. I love connecting with new people on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, and so I'd love to be connected that way. The book Tough as Nails, Finding Your Voice as a Woman in the Workplace, is on Amazon. You can get it on my author site, JoanneRencher.com, but it's also on Amazon. So you can feel free to dig into the book. There's a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of good nuggets for people to learn, and men as well, by the way. Just because it's geared towards towards women doesn't mean men can't benefit. So
Absolutely.
Very true.
Joe, a lot of insight, a lot of wisdom. Really enjoyed the time we had to pick your brain today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And everyone, please do go check out WGNinHR and the book. And I understand I know you had a podcast that you put on pause. Do you have plans on bringing that back?
I do. I'm really thinking about rebranding and sort of being more relevant in the moment. The conversation we were just having in terms of the type of leadership that's needed for today. I'm thinking about rebranding around that. So yeah, I'm excited to sort of resurrect that at the appropriate time. But I really enjoyed this conversation, Jeff and Chris and Frank. I really, really love this topic and these related topics. And so the chance to get to talk about it at length was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank
It's
you.
our pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. And as always, thank you for listening. If you're listening in, please be sure. I think Joe accidentally and inadvertently already plugged our book, Love as a Business Strategy, because that leader that might surprise you, we describe that leader, in our opinion, in our book, Love as a Business Strategy.
Nice.
So please check that out on Amazon or your local, book supplier. And then as always, with the podcast, we will be posting new episodes every Wednesday. And if you like what you heard, please leave a review, subscribe, all the good stuff. Tell your friends, and you can always check us out at softway.com/labs, LAABS. And with that, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Chris. And we will see you all next week.